Доброї раниці, дорогі білоруси, у залі, ті, хто нас глядить. Dear Deputy Assistant Secretary Chris Smith, Your Excellency Ambassador Herbst, dear Shelby, dear friends. First of all, I would like to thank our host, the Atlantic Council, for many years of support. Since 2020, every day and every week, you were covering the protests, repressions, and you were trying to keep Belarus high on the agenda here in the US. It's especially difficult today when there is a competition of global crisis in the world. And I give my thanks to the Atlantic Council Eurasia Center, to Shelby, to Ambassador Herbst. In 2020, when our protests sparked, you proposed the United States to urgently appoint a special envoy on Belarus. And Julia Fisher opened many doors for us. I hope that as a result of strategic dialogue, the US will appoint the new special envoy soon. And this person will be the bridge between Belarus Democratic Forces and the United States. And that will be the strong message of support and solidarity to the Belarusian people. Today, we raise our cooperation on the new level. The strategic dialogue which we just concluded will make our work more coordinated, more efficient, and above all, more strategic. As Chris Smith mentioned yesterday, we are not just reliable allies and entrusted partners. Now we are strategic partners. There were no such cases in history when the US government launched a strategic dialogue not with government actors, but with a democratic movement. It's unprecedented and it's non-conventional. But as we have repeated many times during our strategic dialogue, non-conventional times need non-conventional decisions. As a result of this dialogue, we'll create working groups on specific issues like release of political prisoners, fighting disinformation, supporting civil society and cultural initiatives. And we will draw a roadmap of events and campaigns that will include actors from the US and from the Belarusian side. I hope that the US-Belarusian strategic dialogue will also help to strengthen the agency of Belarusian Democratic Forces and our institutions, such as the United Transitional Cabinet and the Coordination Council. It will empower our civil society initiatives in trying to reach people on the ground to counter toxic Russian and Lukashenka's narratives. We have to show Belarusian people the positive alternative to the Russian world, the future they can have after the collapse of the regime. And only within the European and transatlantic community, Belarus can become a truly independent, democratic, and sovereign country. I know that this path can be long, but this path is the only one for us. We have to break chains of the centuries' dependence on Russia and bring Belarus back to our roots, back to Europe. Earlier this year, at the Munich Security Conference, I announced that Belarus should cease the Belarus-Russia Union State and CSTO. All the deals and agreements between illegitimate Lukashenko and Putin must be recognized as void. Lukashenko doesn't have power to speak and decide on behalf of Belarusian nation. In August 2023, all the democratic forces together made a common decision to follow the European path of development. For the first time, we had consensus on this issue. I understand that the membership in the European Union is a long process, but the first step could be development of the association agreement between democratic Belarus and the European Union. At the hearings in the House of Representatives this week, I asked the US Congress to endorse European and transatlantic aspirations of Belarusians. Many Belarusians want to hear that they are part of this community. And they want to hear this not only from us, democratic forces, but also from you. We have to show Belarusians that in the process of democratic transition, they will have support from the powerful democratic allies. As the European Union already pledged 3 billion euros for democratic Belarus, we also ask the US to consider including Belarus in the regional economy recovery plan to ensure fast and smooth transition from tyranny to democracy. We have to keep in mind that the cancer of tyranny is growing very fast. If not contained, it will spill over entire Europe. I know that the sanctions is not the silver bullet, but it's a treatment of this cancer. We need efficient sanctions on Lukashenka and Putin without loopholes. And we must make sure that all those who help bypass sanctions will not stay unpunished. Individual sanctions are also important. If the judges who jailed Ales Bialiatski 10 years ago knew that they would be on the sanction list, Bialiatski would probably be not jailed now. There probably wouldn't be thousands of sentences against other political prisoners. And I speak not only about judges now, but about also prosecutors, KGB officers, propagandists, and oligarchs. They must be sanctioned too. Let's bring Lukashenko and his cronies to account. For too long, they felt impunity for their actions. And they have a long record of crimes against humanity, hijacking of the Ryanair airplane, orchestrating the migration crisis on the EU borders, abduction of Ukrainian kids from the occupied territories. And the US has powerful expertise to push these cases in the ICC, ICJ, and in national courts under universal jurisdiction. And I can't really understand why Lukashenko hasn't received the arrest warrant yet. It would make him toxic even for his own cronies. And finally, we should support those who strive for changes. I'm talking about political prisoners who need rehabilitation and about their families who need support. I'm talking about independent media and influencers who counter propaganda and connect people inside the country with those who are in exile. I'm talking about democratic institutions, about civil society groups, and of course, about Belarusian diaspora. Additional material assistance from Congress is of crucial importance. Many Belarusians live here in the US, and it would be a great message of solidarity if the US extends the temporary protected status to Belarus. People can't return home to renew their documents because they will be immediately detained. Dear friends, supporting Ukraine, you also support Belarus. The fates of our countries are intertwined. Without free Ukraine, there will be no free Belarus, but also vice versa. Without free Belarus, there will be no security in the whole region. Democratic change in Belarus will be a huge blow to Putin and the great help to Ukraine. And the victory of Ukraine will be the ultimate defeat of Russian imperialism. Therefore, supporting Belarus and supporting Ukraine is not a charity. It's investment in peace and security of the whole Europe. So let's help Ukraine to win this war. Dear friends, for Belarusian people, the United States is a beacon of hope and the champion of democracy. And Belarusians have very high expectations from these talks we have these days. So let's meet these expectations. Let's not fail all those Belarusians who sacrificed for values that the American people cherish so much. 250 years ago, a Belarus-born military officer, Tadeusz Kostyuszka, went to the United States to help the founding fathers win the war for independence. After that, he famously went back home to fight for his motherland to liberate it from the yoke of the Russian Empire. And this is what we must do for Belarus. And we count that the United States of America, the most powerful guardian of democracy in the world, will stand by us, Belarusians, in our quest for freedom. Thank you. God bless America. Long live Belarus. Thank
Thank you very much for those powerful, thorough, and moving remarks. We're really honored to have you here, and now we'll turn to our panel. Deputy Assistant Secretary Smith, how can the United States and the West support the Belarusian democratic movement and civil society as they work to secure a democratic future for the people of Belarus?
Well, first and foremost, thanks so much for the invitation to participate today. It's a great honor to be here together with Sviatlana. It was a great honor to host the strategic dialogue that we've had over the last 2 days, and today is really the kind of crowning and final event of that process. We have been supporting democracy and the sovereignty of Belarus for 30 years. The United States has made a decades-long commitment to this because we believe in it and because it's important, not just for Belarus. It's important for European security. It's important for American security as well. If you need an example of this, look no further than the war in Ukraine. There's no question that a democratic Belarus would never have allowed Putin to send his army into Ukraine from Belarusian territory. And so I think when we look at the regional connections, and Sviatlana just spoke to this in her remarks, they're really stark, and they remind you that this is not just a question about values, which are very important. It's also a question of hard security. So the way in which we can support is by hosting events like the one we just had over the last 2 days, where we had a chance to sit down with Sviatlana, with other leaders from the democracy movement in Belarus, to really talk through the key lines of effort and ensure that U.S. strategic engagement, U.S. assistance resources, and U.S. strategic messaging is tied to a key series of goals that we have developed now together. And from these discussions, we'll set up working groups that will map out a plan of action to ensure that we're making progress on this agenda, that we have a positive agenda moving forward, and to ensure that we are attracting the attention to this issue that it deserves in order to move it forward. I'd like to note my deep appreciation for the resources that have been appropriated by Congress, a significant increase in resources since the election in August 2020. And those resources have enabled us to provide assistance both to the democratic forces, to broader civil society, independent media, to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to advance this critical agenda and move forward.
Great, thank you very much. Ambassador Herbst, where do you think the United States can do more to work with its allies and the Belarusian democratic movement leadership to support both immediate actions to deter Lukashenka's aggression and the development of a future framework for a free and democratic Belarus?
First, I'd like to point out that the administration has done a very good job in its support for the people of Belarus, as represented by the woman who won the last presidential election, Ms. Tsikhanouskaya. But it could always be better. And the one thing that the administration needs to do was actually just called for by Ms. Tsikhanouskaya. Julie Fisher was an excellent envoy to the Belarusian people. And of course, she left that position well over a year ago. It's long past time for there to be a new ambassador appointed, to be working closely with Ms. Tsikhanouskaya and her team. And I look forward to the day that happens. And I urge the U.S. government to demonstrate a bit more than the normal delay, or rather, remove all delay and take care of this right now. That's the single most important thing that can be done. But the fact that Ms. Tsikhanouskaya is here in town, we had a strategic dialogue. President Biden and other senior officials meet with her regularly, demonstrating her legitimacy, that the wishes of the Belarusian people in the election from over 3 years ago are still being represented ably by her and her team, and with the support of the United States.
Great, thank you very much. Franak, as well as endangering the lives of Belarusians, Lukashenka's repressive policies and actions impact regional and global security, particularly as concerns the regime's support for Russia's war in Ukraine. Why is a free and democratic Belarus crucial to geopolitical security?
As Chris Smith already mentioned, if not Belarus, if under control of Putin, probably the war wouldn't start it at all. Second, Belarus provides Putin with all necessary equipment, missiles, tanks. It fuels the war. For many months, Russian soldiers were trained at Belarusian military bases, and Lukashenko justified the war at all international fora. Basically, he's not just in the same boat with Putin, he's on the same team, and he's the same guilty one, as Putin. If we will be able to weaken Lukashenko's regime, it will definitely weaken Putin as well. It can create the domino effect as well in Russian regions, as we saw in 2020 when Belarusians protested and in some Russian regions protests started as well. Belarus right now is like a laboratory for Putin in repressive tactics. He experiments with repressions against, for example, Belarusians living in exile, and very soon probably the same repression will target Russians living in exile. So if we will close, destroy, ruin this laboratory, it will definitely be a big loss for Putin. And this is why Putin is holding so strong with Lukashenko. This is why Putin invests so much in him, because he doesn't want to create the success story. He doesn't want to see Belarus a success story at all. He wants Belarus fail, and he wants Belarus to become Russian province. And if it will become really Russian province, it will be constant threat, not only to Ukraine, but primarily to Baltic states, which already we see in case of migrant crisis.
Thank you. Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, the Lukashenko regime continues to exercise violent repression, as you've highlighted, against the Belarusian people as he strives to hold on to his power through the use of weaponized terror, and many opposition activists reside in exile. What is the state of the democratic movement today?
We have to keep in mind that when we talk about democratic movement, it's first of all people inside Belarus. So it's those who are in exile, and it's 500,000 of people who fled Belarus after 2020, can be more vocal, so maybe they are more visible. You can't expect, really, people on the streets at the moment because huge level of repressions, but people are still there. People building networks of small initiatives, continue to communicate to each other. People are preparing for the new window of opportunities. People who are in exile, our task is to be the voice of those who are silent in Belarus, and our task is to keep democratic forces united, to be creative, to inventive, to find new tools and instruments, or look for new strategy how to fight with the regime. Honestly speaking, we created a United Transitional Cabinet as proto-governments, coordination councils, proto-parliament. We even are going to hold new elections in the coordination council to show Belarusians how really democratic elections should look like. Simultaneously, we are building a relationship with the governments, with parliaments of different countries, formalizing our relationship. And honestly speaking, it's a very difficult fight. It's very difficult to be optimistic when people are being tortured in jails, when there are prosecutions of the families of members of Coordination Council, for example. And people sometimes feel exhausted, sometimes abandoned, and such events like strategic dialogue inspire people and give people energy, to continue the fight. It energizes people. So I'm so grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you for highlighting that. Das Smith, your position covers Belarus along with Ukraine and Moldova. While each case is unique, all three countries contend with a common through line of Russia's malign influence and aggression. How do you view the situation in these countries taken together?
We view the challenge from Russia in Ukraine, Moldova, and Belarus as being directly linked and integrated. And we approach it with a regional approach. As I mentioned earlier, you can see the direct implications of the fact that because Belarus is not a democracy, Russia was able to use it to its advantage and launch the attack against Ukraine from Belarusian territory. That's why when we are working together with our partners in all three countries, we want to assure that our assistance, our engagement is targeted towards similar goals. The counterparts that we have in all of these countries are struggling for their countries. They are struggling for democracy. They're struggling for their freedom, which is inspiring to us, and I think motivates us to carry forward, just as Sviatlana articulated. But it is critical that you look at these countries and the challenges posed by Russia as a common threat. It's in different stages. They exercise influence in different ways, but the threat is the same. The way to address that threat is also the same. The U.S. needs to ensure that we're using our instruments of national power to advocate, support, and advance democracy, peace, stability, and security in all three countries.
Thank you. Franak, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well. How do you see the three taken together?
So we are facing the same evil, which is Russian imperialism. We had similar story of getting independence, but Belarus had a very bad pushback in '94 when Lukashenka came to power. But we can learn a lot from success stories of Ukraine and Moldova right now, trying to lean in on the European Union and trying to get the membership there. And as in 2014, Ukrainian Maidan protests, revival of Ukrainian nation inspired Belarusians for the same trend, you know, the popularity of Belarusian language, vyshyvankas, all these things, they come to Belarus. The same success of Ukraine right now in terms of getting European perspective and future can inspire Belarusians for fighting for their independence right now, because the regime's propaganda is trying to convince that no one is waiting for you there. You're forgotten. They fight each other. This in Germany, in the United States, in UK, they don't care about you. And if we see that they care about Ukraine, care about Moldova, we also say the same. They are taking care of us. So we should fight. We should show a good example. We should demonstrate that we didn't give up. And then we will also have chance for European membership, because people, they want to see the positive alternative. Very often we communicate about sanctions, about punishment, about accountability, all these bad things, and people don't hear, you know, anything good about the future, about what the US are doing for Belarus, how much support is being done already. And I think this is very important to communicate more successful things and success stories. Ukraine can be a success story as well, if we will help Ukraine to win and to get European membership. Already this month probably they will have a chance.
Great, thank you. Ambassador Herbst, the Minsk-Moscow alliance has offered Moscow an edge in its strategy for carrying out its war of aggression in Ukraine. However, while Putin claims he has deployed nuclear weapons and forces to Belarus, Lukashenka has also demonstrated hesitance when it comes to offering full-throated support for Russia's ongoing aggression in Ukraine. How has Russia's war in Ukraine changed the relationship between Putin and Lukashenka, and what do you foresee for the future of this alliance?
First, Lukashenko leaned heavily on Putin after the 2020 election, which again, our guest here won. And that pushed Belarus closer to Russia in ways that were actually not in Belarus's interest, even Lukashenko's interest, and certainly not in ours. When Moscow launched the big invasion, they used Belarusian territory to introduce troops into northern Ukraine against, I think, the preferences of Lukashenko, but he didn't really have any choice. And in fact, the Belarusian people made clear they wanted no part of this, and there was some serious sabotage going on as people in Belarus demonstrated their unhappiness about the situation. But still, Putin held the whip hand, going back to the 2020 election. But then something funny happened. The seams in the Russian government that clearly were strengthened, or rather I should say weakened, by the Russian invasion of Ukraine began to become apparent in the activity of Prigozhin, which resulted in Prigozhin's mutiny. And we all know that Putin was not, or did not feel, sufficiently powerful to deal with Prigozhin in a straightforward way, like sending troops to stop his movements on Moscow and arresting him for treason. So Lukashenko wound up being a vehicle for Putin to try and deal with the Prigozhin problem in a way reflecting his weak position. So that, for a period of time, gave Lukashenko a bit of an edge. I think that edge has pretty much worn off. The old dynamic remains in place, meaning that Lukashenko is still dependent upon Putin, who's not afraid to use that dependence. That's why you have the threats of, and perhaps the actual deployments of nukes on Belarusian territory. It's a measure that Putin takes as part of his, so far, partly successful plan to intimidate the West with a nuclear warning. This, again, is not in Belarus's interest. It's not even in Lukashenko's interest, who has always tried to maintain a certain flexibility vis-a-vis Moscow. but he's not in a position to exercise that. Bottom line, Putin's activity, not just in Ukraine, but as Chris pointed out, across not just the post-Soviet space, but into Europe, and for that matter, into the Middle East, is designed to undermine not just the international liberal order, but concrete Western interest, American interest in Europe. And Lukashenko is an instrument for him to do that. And that's one more reason, again, Chris made this point earlier, that we have geopolitical interests as well as humanitarian, democratic interests in helping restore legitimacy to the government in Belarus, meaning the elected representative of the people being in charge. I am not, therefore, explicitly calling for regime change, but I'm saying we need to see new leadership in Belarus, again, consistent with the wishes of the Belarusian people. And I suspect that will happen when, not so clear, but not in the too far distant future.
Thank you. Franak, in recent shows of support for a free Belarus, the Belarusian Democratic Forces now have an office in the Council of Europe, and the OSCE has created a group of Friends of Democratic Belarus. How have Belarus's European neighbors responded to Lukashenko's repression at home and abroad, and what steps have and should European countries and multinational organizations take to deter and prevent the regime's aggression?
So we are trying to formalize a relationship with the international organizations in OSCE, thanks to Ambassador Carpenter and many other ambassadors from allied states helped to establish this group. But in general, OSCE is in a big crisis, and it's not able to react to humanitarian catastrophe with political prisoners in Belarus. For example, we try to pay attention of ODIHR, but they are unable, and we see that right now Russia is blocking the process of changing the leadership of OSCE, so it's not much helpful. The same with the United Nations. UN Human Rights Council is dominated by authoritarian states, and it's very hard to get any resolution or decision or even any step from the Office of High Commissioner on Human Rights. And we tried many ways. We passed them the list of political prisoners who are in critical health condition and needs immediate release because they can die any moment, but unfortunately no big result. We are trying to work with national governments, and this is the most successful thing, especially our neighbors, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia. We are much better with Ukraine right now. This year was a real improvement in relationship with Verkhovная Rada, Parliament, Office of Zelensky. It changed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Ukraine is much more open for cooperation. But of course, big allies like United States, Germany, UK, France, very important to us. Germany assigned a special person dedicated to democratic forces. Robert Wagner, a special envoy, was sent by France to work with democratic forces as well. Sweden just appointed Kristina Johannesson to work with Belarus. So basically we create this legitimacy through formalizing a relationship with international organization. It's not efficient, it's not enough, but this is something we should do to keep Belarus on the agenda and to make this work more systematic, not only in support direction, but also in accountability efforts, also in sanctions efforts, because right now there are many steps that are being done, but very often they are not synchronized between even allied states. Compared to 2020, there is much less synchronization right now. And unfortunately, even within European Union member states, there is no, I don't have confidence that next year, we will have all the decisions passed quickly and easily, considering the recent changes of government in few EU member states.
Thank you. Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, as you've mentioned, immediately following the 2020 election, Lukashenko's security apparatus detained 35,000 civilians demonstrating against the fraudulent results. As of this week, the Vyazna Human Rights Center documented that there are more than 1,450 political prisoners in Belarus today, including your husband. Is it at all possible to resist the regime on the ground in Belarus, and what consequence do people face as they actively try to oppose the regime?
Actually, the number of political prisoners you named is not final number. Our human rights defenders centers consider that it's up to 5,000 people behind the bars for political motivated cases. relatives of prisoners are afraid to claim them as political, because attitude to political prisoners is much, much worse than to ordinary criminals. People are kept in isolation, people are humiliated constantly, physical, morally, people are being tortured, people are marked with like special yellow labels, meaning that they had to be treated inhumanly in prisons. Many people now are kept in incommunicado mode, and it's a type of torturing, including my husband and me, Nikolai Statkevich, Alice Belyatsky, Maria Kolesnikova, and many others. It means that lawyers cannot get access to political prisoners, letters are not delivered, so we actually don't know what's going on with people. And we want to use all the possible instruments and organizations who have mandate, to demand access to political prisoners to see the state of their health. Actually, we have about 100 people who are in extremely poor health conditions, people with cancer, diabetes, heart attacks, who need unconditional release. And we have to pay attention to this issue. We have to demand from Red Cross or international human rights defense centers, to use all the possible tools, to release these people without any conditions. And of course, those people who continue to fight, and it's huge, vast majority of people, inside Belarus and outside, of course, they are continuing to be persecuted. Every day in Belarus, about 15, 20 people are being detained. Last week, there were more than 200 searches of the relatives of those people who are working in Coordination Council or United Transitional Cabinet or in my office. It's revenge on those who continue to fight, who are very active politically or as a part of civil society. And it's so awful to know, for example, together with us, my advisor on youth, Margarita Vorikhova, whose mother was detained for 15 years jail, just because being mother of Margarita, who is our advisor, who is very active in youth direction. And but you see, people are not giving up. We are preparing elections in Coordination Council, and because we understand that if we stop, if they manage to threat us, if we stop, if we give up, the tensions will continue. Nothing will change in our country. And in this very moment, we have to show all the decisiveness and unity, not only among Belarusian democratic forces, but around democratic countries, just to show regimes that, look, you will not blackmail us. We will go till our victory.
Thank you for highlighting some of those individual cases as well as the vast numbers that we don't have full vision of. Das Smith, can you please react to that issue?
Yeah, absolutely. The administration, the United States, has condemned in the strongest possible terms the Lukashenka regime's attacks on human rights. It's illegal imprisonment of political prisoners. We call for the release of all political prisoners. We condemn their attacks on democracy, and we condemn their facilitation of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And we have used all of the instruments of U.S. national power in order to hold the Lukashenka regime accountable for these crimes. In 2021, on the one-year anniversary of the fraudulent elections, we announced a new executive order on Belarus sanctions. And we have used that instrument to great effect in order to target sanctions, both at the sources from which Lukashenko and his regime draw strength, but also towards the instruments they use to repress and carry out their attacks on democracy, on human rights, and on those who are defending their country. They are defending their democracy, and we are fully supportive, and we endorse the Belarusian people's legitimate demands for human rights. And we will continue to use our engagement, our assistance, and as I mentioned before, our sanctions authorities in order to support those efforts.
Thank you. Going back to Russia, What would be the impact in Belarus if we saw the demise of Putin's regime? And how would Belarus be impacted by an authoritarian replacement or a less aggressive regime in Russia?
Well, I don't really want to get into hypotheticals. I think the most important aspect of our engagement and the most important aspect of our assistance and support for a free and democratic Belarus is to ensure that when the strategic moment comes, Belarus is ready to embrace and advance its democratic aspirations without the interference of external efforts from Russia or anywhere else, and to ensure that they are ready to move quickly when that moment comes.
Thank you. Not to force you into hypotheticals, but anyone else want to take on what the demise of Putin's regime would impact Belarus?
Ambassador wants me.
You don't have to. I'll
No. That's hypothetical. Yeah, of course. But I do believe that changes in Belarus are much more plausible and likely to happen before collapse of Russian Putin's regime, because Belarusian society is different, because it's very pro-democratic with deep historical tradition, because we had 2020 and Russians did not have. We also see the reactions and attitude towards the war. In Belarus, 86 to 91% of Belarusians against Belarus participation in the war, and only 4.5% of Belarusians, according to a recent survey, want Belarus reunification with Russia. So it's very different, very pro-European. Even if you travel, the road, from Belarus to Russia, you see it in villages and cities how they organize. Belarus is ready for democratic change. It's ready, but there is no this momentum. We lost the first momentum, but there will be another one, and we have to be prepared for this momentum. We need good structures, good contacts, good visibility in the world, but also democratic allies prepared. In 2020, no one was prepared. Neither Putin nor Lukashenka nor West nor ourselves for that events. Now we should be better prepared. And of course, scenarios can be very different of changes in Belarus, but I doubt that changes in Russia will start sooner. But things like mutiny of Prigozhin can be triggers for changes in Belarus. And we felt it when it started. Suddenly, sleeping Belarusian society was ready to go out. They started to write thousands of messages. When there is a protest, when we go, suddenly people around Lukashenka started to write and connect us and saying, okay, so what we do, we support you, just reminding us that, not all of them are brainwashed and pro-Russian. So people can be triggered by events in Russia, by victories in Ukraine, by internal fights of Lukashenko's nomenklatura, but also by brave steps of the democratic world, and we should show these brave steps. And this strategic dialogue is also a brave step, but expectations are quite high.
Thank you. Ambassador Herbst?
I agree with Franek's analysis of what would happen in Belarus if there's a loosening in Moscow. The people of Belarus are ready to turn towards freedom, towards the West, and that will certainly happen if there's a loosening in Russia. If there's an authoritarian following Putin, whose policies are very similar, then sadly the yoke on Belarus will probably remain in place, albeit not perhaps quite as strong. But if there's a less aggressive ruler in Moscow, not necessarily a Democrat, who understands that Russia's interests are to become a normal country, not an empire, lording it over the peoples in its vicinity, that would also open space for Belarus to move exactly as the people of Belarus would like it to move. And I'm willing to make a prediction that within 20 years, something of that kind will occur, and hopefully a lot sooner than 20 years. You heard it here first.
Okay, thank you. Going over to the news as we are in D.C. As we see stalling support in U.S. aid to Ukraine, this is for you, and recent assertions that the country is running out of money to support Ukraine's war effort have come to the forefront of the political narrative in the U.S. What does this signal to Lukashenka and his regime, and how might this impact the regime's calculus on taking steps further toward or away from Moscow?
The United States has a vital interest, I repeat, vital interest, in ensuring Putin loses in Ukraine. If he loses in Ukraine, I think it's safe to say that the whole concept of Russian empire over its neighbors is kaput. Our policy doesn't fully reflect that, unfortunately. And even more unfortunately, there's a small subset of the Republican Party who would enable Putin to win by cutting off aid to Ukraine. And sadly, that small subset has an outsized influence, which is why we are right now at the most dangerous moment since Moscow began its war in Ukraine, not just 2 years ago, but 10 years ago. I suspect, but I don't know for sure, that we're going to get past this danger. I know the administration and Republicans in both the Senate and even the House, note the even, are working to fix this. If they do, meaning if the United States maintains at a minimum the support that it has been providing since the big invasion began, Ukraine will ultimately win and Putin will ultimately lose. But if somehow what I've just said does not occur, and the prospects are more than small that the bad outcome could result, the danger is that this would give Putin the ability to impose his will on Ukraine, in which case his will on Belarus will remain even tighter than it is today, and the prospects of Putin moving not just on Moldova or Georgia, or for that matter, Kazakhstan, but even on Estonia or Lithuania or Poland goes way up, which is why we have a vital interest in stopping Putin in Ukraine. This is the smart place to do it. It only requires American dollars, and far fewer American dollars than if Putin were to win in Ukraine and do something nasty in Central Europe.
Thank you. Franak, Lukashenka recently signed a new decree that stated Belarusian diplomatic missions will no longer issue new passports to citizens living abroad, nor will they renew expired passport documents. How has this and will this concretely impact Belarusians living abroad and the democratic forces, many of whom live outside of Belarus?
It's the huge problem right now for all Belarusians who left Belarus after 2020, and not only, to receive documents, to open bank accounts. Also because of attitudes towards Belarus change in the world, because all the media were treating Belarusians like they're supporters of Lukashenko's regime. So it took us a while first to change the attitudes towards Belarusians, and second, we have to solve these practical issues, practical problems with documents, because people who are returning back to Belarus to renew passports, very often they're being detained, they're being imprisoned, and we call on them not to do that. Instead, we ask governments where they are living right now to provide these people with longer residence permits, with foreigners' passports or aliens' passports, which allow them to travel abroad, and also to simplify procedures and to not request such documents like apostille or police record, which require to return back to Minsk. This is a short-term solution we have, and we see Germany this week, they announced they're going to give foreigners' passport to Belarusians. Before Poland and Lithuania started to issue these passports. There is such passport in the United States, and we will be asking also to simplify procedures of providing these passports. But many countries, they don't have such thing as a foreigner's passport, like Latvia or Spain, where also many Belarusians live. So we are developing a long-term solution, which will be very important for us to build and to preserve Belarusian community, the new Belarusian passport, which will be given based on the previous official passport. This is the document according to all international standards, issued in the safe way. People will be verified, and this passport will allow people to travel, probably, to put their visas, but also to identify themselves. Of course, it will take a long time to get the recognition, to receive some status for this document. It's unprecedented, and we feel, this some resistance, especially from lawyers who say it's impossible, it's unprecedented. But many things were impossible. 1-2 years ago, many things were impossible to do, or to launch strategic dialogue was impossible even 2 years ago, or United Transitional Cabinet, to get recognized. Now everyone is meeting the United Transitional Cabinet as alternative government on the highest level. So we proceed with this document and we explain 2 goals: solve practical issues, but also to build Belarusian community so far in exile, but also to keep people involved in Belarusian activities so they return back home when country will be open again.
Thank you. Just to make it explicit, how clear is the threat for people if they were to return from abroad to Belarus? What would happen to them?
People who are returning to Belarus, they are checked very often at the border, and you never know. It's like a lottery you will be detained or not. There is no logic. People can receive 15 days of arrest or 15 years of prison, and you can't explain, sometimes people work in the same organizations, they receive very different treatment in Belarus. So there is no logic, and let's not look for logic in actions of the regime right now. This is arbitrary, it's spontaneous, it's emotional what Lukashenko is doing right now. Same at the border, it's where we ask people, it's your own risk. When you cross the border and when you travel often through the border, at some point you can be arrested. And then they will find the accusations and the crime, to put you in jail for years. Why you risk with that? Don't do this, especially right now when Lukashenko feels very, very vulnerable.
Thank you. Das Smith, how can the United States and the West hold the Lukashenko regime to account for the human rights abuses we've heard about and its complicity in the war against Ukraine?
Well, I think it starts first and foremost by making sure that we're using every available opportunity to focus attention on what is happening inside Belarus. And as I said from the beginning, why it matters in the region and why it matters to the United States. The attacks on human rights and democracy that we've spoken about earlier by the Lukashenko regime do extend to the facilitation of Putin's full-scale invasion, as we saw, and ongoing actions abducting Ukrainian children. And we rolled out sanctions earlier this week specifically targeting those involved in the Lukashenko regime in those child abductions from Ukraine. So sanctions are obviously one of our hard tools available to impose cost and hold the regime to account. But most importantly, I think we need to use every opportunity to remind people about what is happening. That is one of the elements also of this strategic dialogue. We've taken the opportunity to highlight and revitalize our approach to democracy in Belarus. And moving forward from the strategic dialogue, we're going to have a working group focused specifically on this question of sanctions, specifically targeting sanctions, as I said before, the sources from which the Lukashenko regime draws strength, but also the instruments that it uses to attack democracy, attack human rights, and support the war in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, where do you expect your movement to be in 5 years, and what else would you like the US and EU to do? And in your opinion, if you want the hypothetical, if Putin's regime were to crumble, what would happen in Belarus?
Maybe I will start from the end. Of course, crumbling of Putin's regime in Belarus will definitely help Belarusians in this fight, but I honestly believe, and I agree with Frank here, that changes in our country might happen faster than changes in Belarus, because Belarusian society is more solid and more determined. I can dream about 5 years' term, what Belarus will look like, but our aim is to make Belarus democratic, free, and on its firm path to European Union. Of course, it's about new free and fair elections, about legitimate representative democratic institutions, about free society, free media, all these mantra words. But what I want to appeal to Belarusians now who are watching us is that we can't win our fight only with hope. It's everyday hard job, and it's responsibility of each of us just to contribute into this fight. Just laying on the sofa, doing nothing, just only hoping and dreaming, we will be at the same place we were all these years. So please, don't lose hope, but be more active and be more persistent in our fight.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us. The Atlantic Council will continue to stand with Belarus and bring attention where we can. Thank you for your time, and thank you to our distinguished panel, and thank you sincerely.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.